Good afternoon, everyone. I am the presenter for today. I am Dr. Kelly Bronson. I'm a faculty member in the School of Sociological and Anthropological Studies, and I'm going to talk to you about sociology at University of Ottawa today. My actual title is not just faculty member, but I am something called the Canada Research Chair, which means I do teach, and I do teach undergraduates. So for example, this term, I teach a large undergraduate class called the Sociology of Food and Foodways, which is a sort of taking a sociological view of the food, something we call the food system, and our habits of consumption, and looking at those critically as in analytically. But I do less teaching than other faculty members, but I do enough teaching that I can answer questions about teaching, and I can certainly tell you about research. And as you probably know, at university, your professors are researchers and they're teachers, and they bring in all of this rich, wonderful research that they do outside of teaching into the classroom. Which makes university quite different from high school experiences. So now we're at 11 people, that's great. So for newcomers, just the short version, my name is Dr. Kelly Bronson. I'm a Canada Research Chair, the title of which is Science and Society, and I study controversial technologies and social resistance to science and technology. And yeah, let's get started. So I'm gonna share my screen with you so that I can play a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, except for we're not starting on the first slide, and we should begin at the beginning, as the king said to Alice in Alice in Wonderland. So welcome, everyone. This says here, Phyllis Rippey is giving this presentation. I am not Phyllis Rippey. Phyllis shared this slide presentation with me from a previous year. Phyllis is also a professor in the Department of, or the School of Sociology at the University of Ottawa, but my name is Kelly Bronson. Okay, so without further ado, what is sociology? Well, you're in this presentation, so you obviously know enough to be curious, but I'll just say it quickly. One major thing that distinguishes sociology from other disciplines in the social sciences and in the arts is that in sociology, we study things empirically. And what does that mean? That means that we study phenomenon, and we then find empirical or data sort of or evidence to support the kind of claims we make about those phenomenon. So in sociology at the University of Ottawa, even at the undergraduate level in your classes, you will be asked to bring evidence to bear on arguments you make. And that's what we do in the research we do as faculty members in sociology. And we study, right, aspects, maybe that's the next slide, aspects of society like social dynamics, social institutions like the family, right? Or organizations like the school system or religion or social media. So we study social dynamics, processes, large social structures like the global economy, for example, but we're really interested in relationships in sociology. But if I had a question, say, for example, what influences, as I said before, I'm really interested in the dynamic between members of society and controversial technologies. And if I had a question, for example, why do some members of the public resist biotechnologies or GMOs? Unlike in disciplines, for example, like philosophy, where you would maybe, think very carefully about why, you would come up with a logical argument as to why based on your own thinking and logic, right? And you would sort of try to test that argument against its own internal logic. In sociology, we would look for evidence on the ground for why, right? So for example, we might, and this is something I have done, go to communities of people who are resisting genetically modified organisms or protesting GMOs. And we might use interviews and ask them, why are you protesting GMOs? And so that's what it means, just to go back a slide, to study something empirically. It's to be able to test a claim that you make. In sociology, we provide evidence for the claims we make. And that's what distinguishes us from, say, other disciplines in the social sciences or in the arts. But also it's, what we focus on. And as I said before, we focus on social relationships or dynamics, both at the kind of micro level, right? Again, the family dynamic, or dynamic, say, among genders, right? Within, a small institutional environment, but also we look at broad social structures, like the influence of the global economy on lots of things, or the influence of what are called norms, right? The ways that we imagine we ought to act as someone, I'm referring to myself here, who identifies as a woman, right? What are some of the ways that society, say advertising, or the messages I got growing up, kind of tell me I ought to act as a woman, and that's norms. So we study those kinds of things in sociology. And why study those kinds of things? Well, studying social dynamics is really important for understanding contemporary society. It's a really transferable set of knowledge, right? Policymakers are all the time wanting to answer questions about why, for example, members of the public are resisting GMOs or vaccines, for example, right? Why do some social groups behave the way they do? What are current dynamics vis-a-vis racial justice, right, in this country? Those are the kinds of questions a sociologist is concerned with and tries to provide answers to, again, using empirical data. And that's a really, really valuable thing today as well, because in sociology, we study things empirically. If you study sociology, you end up learning all sorts of transferable skills for collecting evidence, for collecting data, whether it's how to write a survey, how to design a survey to study members of society or social dynamics, how to administer that survey, how then to make sense of the data you get from that survey, right? How to do qualitative interviews, which are very much like a conversation, but it's a very specific and structured kind of conversation. And maybe you're interested in quantitative sociology, which means that you would learn how to navigate through and manipulate such that you could gather evidence from it, large data sets. For example, the large national census data that is collected every 4 years in Canada. Okay, so you in sociology, you will come out with, if you pursue a degree in sociology, you will be able to sort of have a handle on current social dynamics, including ones that affect you personally, but you also will go out into a workforce with transferable skills, being able to answer questions in a very reasonable and evidence-based way about why certain social dynamics are the way they are, which again is really useful in the private sector, in public sector, in policy, for example. But also you'll have a whole toolkit of methods that you can put on your CV. I know how to do content analysis. And actually, I put myself through my PhD working for a research firm in Toronto doing content analysis for a firm that wrote reports for the private sector, for the government, that summarized phenomenon. And so content analysis is one of these very transferable and useful skills. Okay, why study sociology here with us at the University of Ottawa? Which is a really good question, because there are other universities competing for your attention. And so why choose us? Well, there's the rankings, right? Other people have objectively deemed the University of Ottawa a really great place to study sociology. So our School of Sociological and Anthropological Studies, and in particular the program of sociology, has ranked really high in what are called the QS World University Rankings, which are an international standard of ranking departments, sociology departments. We have a number of professors, and the bullet here, again, I didn't design these slides, but 70% of us have been hired within the last 10 years. I got hired at the University of Ottawa in 2017. And the year before me, there were 3 people around my sort of career stage and age who were hired. I think the logic behind this bullet point for whomever developed these slides was that, you know, recent hires means you're hiring researchers like myself who are interested in really current phenomenon. Or phenomena. So, you know, as I said before, I research controversies that erupt around controversial technologies, everything from GMOs to artificial intelligence, and energy developments like pipelines, for example, and hydraulic fracturing. And as we all know, probably you have some notion of this, you know, things like pipeline politics are a really current site for researching debate and controversy, right? And so these are sort of very current things to research. Other of my colleagues who have been hired in the last 10 years are really interested in the sociology of health, for example, and patient-led medicine. You know, how is it that drug trials are designed, and how can they be designed equitably, and how much say should patients have in the trajectory that drug research takes, for example? What's the influence of big pharma on the direction of medical research? Others are really interested in social activism, which kind of aligns with my research too, but and environmental activism. So these are just examples. So, you know, that many of us, so there are a number of professors who have a variety of research interests, but many of us have been hired recently, and we're at a similar career stage and similar age, and we're interested in really current debates, like those, for example, around racial justice, which is one I didn't mention. We have, because we're a very large school, so we're not just a department, but we're actually designated a school at the University of Ottawa. And because we're quite large, we pull in a lot of students. So it's a lively department. When you come to the University of Ottawa, especially in non-COVID times, you will find yourself immersed in a critical mass of students who are interested in lively debate and conversation. And that kind of having that kind of critical mass of other students is really important, I can tell you, for university experience. So, you know, going to university is important for a number of reasons. One, perhaps top of mind for you, is because a university degree is really necessary for you to enter the workforce and you know, achieve a certain level of job security over your lifetime. But also it's a time, when your mind will get expanded, right? You're going to be exposed in the classroom to readings and ways of thinking that you until then had not experienced. But also, I think equally important is the ways that your fellow students also kind of broaden your perspectives. Okay, so this speaks to the number of students. We also have quite a strong scholarship success rate in our department, and we have internal bursaries and scholarships that we offer our students, and it's quite competitive. The funding package that you could get as a scholarship student is quite competitive at University of Ottawa. Okay, so I've already sort of spoken to some of this. You know, what are the kind of transferable skills, you could think of it, that you might gather at the University of Ottawa? They're in research, right? So this idea of gathering data, different kinds of social data, analysis, analyzing those data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. So qualitative, an example of that would be interview data, and quantitative, right, would be using statistical analysis of national census data, for example. You'll get a really good kind of conceptual grounding, and that just means, you know, grounding in really careful ways of thinking and patterns of thought that will serve you no matter what you go on to do. Because I can tell you that one of the fastest ways to establish yourself in any job or career, right, is to set yourself apart by demonstrating that you are a really good problem solver and critical thinker. And those are skills you'll learn in sociology, the kind of training you'll get. But more than that, we do have practical training options for students. So we do offer a co-op option I don't know a lot about it, but I did make sure to take some notes if you have questions. And more than that, I can point you toward someone. I was told to point you toward someone by email who knows about the co-op quite well, a lot. And so we do have a co-op option, which is a good idea because especially in the capital city in Ottawa, if you do a co-op, there's a number of co-ops available with the public sector. And that's the fastest route to a really, really secure and in many ways ideal job working in government. Okay. So what different kinds of research projects are faculty engaged in? I already briefly described some of them, but here are some of the research questions that ground some of the work that my colleagues are doing. So, for example, Phyllis, who did originally design this slide deck, she's interested in breastfeeding and in particular, the relationship between breastfeeding and the impact on the father's involvement in infant care. So again, someone who's interested in the family dynamic or unit, right, which is exemplary of the kind of work that sociologists do. When did agricultural seed innovation become controversial? That's an example of something that I research or have researched, right? Why do certain farmers go to the courts against Monsanto Corporation for their commercial release of what's called GMOs or genetically modified organisms? How are seeds controversial? In what ways? How did they become controversial? And as a sociologist, right, I'm interested in then the impact of those seeds on, for example, relationships among farmers, or understanding that controversy in its historical and social context. And I'm happy in questions to answer more questions about my research. What kinds of emotional labor and are involved, right, with social activists, right? How is that job or career different vis-a-vis social relation or emotional regulation? How do we make the medical system attentive to patients' personal circumstances? So that was an example of, I was saying, one of my colleagues who's a sociologist of health and of medicine. Can sociology save bioethics? I don't actually know who in our department studies that, but it sounds like a really interesting question. How does language choice in Canada's educational system contribute to domination or discrimination, right? And that's a classical sociological question, right? How do classroom textbooks maybe perpetuate discrimination, right? Fundamentally, and maybe this is something for that prior slide, sociologists are not just interested in social issues and social relationships or dynamics, again, at the micro or even the macro level, but we're also really interested in power. So that's one of the main things that motivates me. In what ways do technologies can they reproduce power unethically, right? Can a new innovation, and we've seen it happen historically, how does it have the potential to concentrate power, right, in the hands of the few already powerful, as opposed to benefiting wider society? Okay. And how does the Sea Life movement as an activist movement, environmental activist movement, challenge colonialism, right? So what's the intersection, again, between environmental activism and settler colonial dynamics? Okay. So here are the courses that, what courses can I take, right? You will take Principles of Sociology. You will take a class called Social Conflicts, Activism, and Social Change. This is an example, right, of how a sociologist study what we call social dynamics, one being social change, right? How does social change happen? How is it that we went over a few hundred years from women not being considered subhuman to women being considered equal to men? Or, I mean, I don't mean to invoke gender binaries, but right, how have we, or talking about, right, a plurality of genders or gender as a performance? How has that process happened? And so that's what you would study when you talk about social change. And then beyond second year, right, if you go to this URL, you will see online all sorts of courses that are available to you, including electives, right, that you can take outside of sociology. And so that is something you should look at if you're considering this program seriously. Okay, so this just sort of gives you the breakdown of the required and the optional courses, the one I just talked about, you taking them outside the department. And here are some topic or thematically specific courses, and maybe you'll see something in there that really interests you, right? Are you really interested in deviance, right? In counterpublics or counterculture, it's called. Are you interested in social movements, which actually can connect to deviance, right? If you're talking about social movements that use direct action to protest particular social events. Are you interested in family dynamics, in health, right? And this, so what's called the social determinants of health, in technological change. And again, that's my domain. In my research, are you interested in demography, right? Whether it's health or other kind of population level phenomenon. Okay. So I want to leave time. We're running out of time, but so where can you go? I've already spoken to this, but trust me that a sociology degree is absolutely comes with a set of universal skills, or a skill set you will graduate with that is highly transferable in public, private, and in the sort of, we're saying here, voluntary sector, but I would call it the nonprofit sector. So again, in terms of topics, right, having a sort of grasp on really current, being able to understand current topics of current interest, especially to say policymakers, but as well the private sector, and then research skills, the kind of data collection and analysis toolkit you'll end up with after getting a sociology degree is highly transferable. Okay, so I think maybe we'll skip this because these were some quotations that sort of validate where the usefulness of a sociology degree. But I think I'll just show you the slide because I think, yeah. So where can I go? Look at all these people, these well-known people that you know, right? Some of whom are famous actors and writers, like Daniel Levy, Michelle Obama, right? Martin Luther King Jr., Dan Aykroyd, Robin Williams. So, you get it. You get the point. Really well-known people who have changed the face of whether it's like, mass culture or popular culture, or whether it's politics, right? And they all had a sociology background. Okay, so are there any questions